then they won't feel the pressure. And then when they give, it'll be because they really want to and they really believe in it. And so it just is sort of like, it's why I like what I say with the leadership here. I just say, I always tell people three things. I say, pray, have conversations with people that you make decisions about money with, if there are any. Pledge whatever God puts on your heart. I said, if all of us truly engage those three things, we're going to be fine. And then it's not me saying, it's just like, do that and trust in God. Trust in God's provision. So, 3 minutes, let me tell you. So those of you who are here in the room, we've just been hanging out talking, and we're just going to do it with microphones in about 3 minutes. And we've got folks online. Good to see everybody online. Just thank you so much. Just looking around, it is just good to see everybody here. Good to see you. Oh, good. Wonderful. And so if you're watching us online, just a reminder that our guest this morning is Pastor Eddie Anderson of McCarty Memorial Church, and he is also going to be our preacher at the 10 o'clock service. And as good as he will be online, he will be even better in person. So if you got a chance to jump in the car and get down here, jump in the car and get down here. It's a beautiful day. And we're having a Super Bowl party at 3, so you can just, after that, stay for the financial town hall meeting at 11:45 and the Super Bowl party at 3, and then we've got the interfaith study group at 5 if the game is bad. And we got stuff going on here all day, so there's still time for you to get on your bike, get in your car, get on Metrolink, and get on down here, and we'll have a great day together. It's going to be a gorgeous day. And then I'm just going to fill this. We got 1 more minute. Just a reminder, obviously, this is the last Sunday before Lent, which means on Tuesday is Shrove Tuesday, and we've got a tradition here. We started it during COVID when we couldn't come together, and we're just continuing it. And it's we invite everyone to think of things in your life that you want to release, that you want to let go of, the burdens or things that you want to lay down, that you want to say, God, take this and not me. And to write them down on a piece of paper or a note card or something. And then between 4 and 6 p.m. on Tuesday, we're going to have a fire out in the... It'll be contained. Blaine Kavanaugh, who is our resident Boy Scout. I shouldn't say this, especially in a building that once burned down. It will be contained the way we do on the Easter Vigil, and you'll have a chance just to take that piece of paper and throw it into the fire as a way of saying, I'm releasing this for myself. It is. I've done it the last couple years. It's an amazing healing experience, and so we'll do that from 4 to 6, and then we have the return of the pancake supper from 5 to 7 p.m. On Tuesday, and that's good. And then we have Ash Wednesday services at 7:30, 12:30, and I think I'm going to get those wrong. It'll be on the website. And then we have also Ashes to Go at the Yellow Line station much of the day, or as my spouse likes to call it, Ash and Dash. So you can do that. And then also a bunch of us, because we're the host of Prism Restorative Justice, and several of us are going into the prisons, and you have to have had the training to do that. But that's something that if it's something you want to do next Ash Wednesday, we go to Twin Towers, we go to Men's Central Jail, come and talk to me, talk to Sharon Crandall, and we can get you all trained up and licensed by the Sheriff's Department to go into the jails. It's really a profound experience. So I think we're at 9 o'clock right now, so I'll officially welcome, and I've got to, this is the formality. I've got to formally introduce our guest. First of all, my name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector, the senior pastor here at All Saints Church. It is good to have us in the forum. And let me just get this real quick. We're really blessed this morning to have our guest is Reverend Eddie Anderson. Pastor Eddie is a passionate civil rights activist and ordained ministers with degrees from Morehouse College and Claremont School of Theology. Eddie was born on Warner Robins Air Force Base and raised on the south side of Atlanta as the fourth and youngest child of Reverend is it Ganis? Gaines and Priscilla Anderson. Currently, he serves historic McCarty Memorial Christian Church, located in the West Adams neighborhood of Los Angeles. Now, there's a little thing I need to tell you about called the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment says that churches can endorse ballot issues, can talk about issues, can have conversations with candidates for office. We just can't give a contribution to them, and we can't endorse them, or really, you've got to be careful about what we say. Eddie is a candidate for Los Angeles City Council. And that's not why he's here today. I want to be really clear about that. Eddie's been here before. He's a good friend. He works with both LA Voice and Clue. He has a unique perspective that work is giving him. And that will enter into our conversation, but I want to be super clear, this is not a campaign appearance or an endorsement. And yet we're really, I'm grateful. And part of it is that I'm actually a little intrigued at anyone who would offer themselves for public service at such a time like this. And so, first of all, Eddie, welcome. Can we welcome Eddie Anderson?
Good morning. Good to be here.
So, just sort of want to start off, with all superheroes, we start off with the origin story. Your bio, which I just cribbed from the church website, says you were born on an Air Force base, you grew up as a child of a pastor. Can you kind of talk about your faith upbringing and how that has led you to not just being a pastor, but being an activist?
Yeah, so, I think I have to go, it's Black History Month, so I want to give homage to my ancestors as well. So, my folk are what you would call, on my dad's side, Geechee folks. So, Geechee Gullah, like Geechee Gullah Islands. So they're from deep South Georgia, near Savannah, in a place called Riceboro. That's where it starts for me and my family, and my grandfather was a pastor and a farmer and later on a politician. And my dad grew up with one of 13. He's one of 13 children. And my mom, she was the only child of her parents, but had plenty of half-siblings. And so they really raised us with this, I would say, this mindset around service. Right? That the story I remember hearing all the time growing up was my father telling me about growing up on the farm and having to milk cows and chickens and do all kind of things, and then staying late and not being able to play sports because his dad would have him help him take care of the neighbors around and make sure that they had food as well. And then when he went to the military, the same thing. And so I grew up believing you had to serve. Right? That when you see someone in need, you take care of them. When you see your neighbors in need, you take care of them. My aunts and uncles used to joke that my house was United Nations because you never knew who was going to be there. And our sleepovers invited the entire school, basically, to our house to spend time because my father really, and my mother really, put upon us that you serve others, you love one another, and that you try to be the hands and feet of God, right? That if Jesus is going to be here, then it's going to be you. It's no one else. And so that's how I was raised, and that Geechee background also just really kept us tied to our ancestors, really kept us rooted. We would go down home and have low country boils and hear, I tell people, you want to feel the spirit of God, go to an old church down south, but it's no real music but a piano and people are foot stomping and clapping their hands, or you hear the mothers moaning on the front bench, right? That's where I realized, there's something to this God thing, and so that's my background. That's what helps me do service. And so even when I came after Morehouse College and came out here, the question was, how do I serve, and who's not included at the table, right? I came to seminary, which is a joke in my family because my father, out of all of his kids, never saw me being the one being turned out to be a preacher. But I went to seminary and I told my dad, I feel called to mend the broken body of the sacred. And we came to Claremont, and I have to just be honest. They told me it was in LA. And my dad drops me off, and my dad's a military guy. I've never seen him cry except for his father's funeral. But as he get ready to leave, a tear comes out of his eye. He goes, I don't know if you're gonna make it out here. Like, there's no black people. There's nothing. Like, how are you going to survive? But I thought, this is the place when you're isolated somewhat. And that's how I found Clue. That's how I started serving on Crossroads for Women, which was a reentry home for women who were serving life without parole. And then from there, the journey kept on building, like, what is going on in LA and how do we mend the broken by the sacred here as well. Well,
and I love that you went back to your grandparents. It reminds me, a bunch of us went and visited Pastor Otis Moss III at Trinity UCC about a year ago. And he spent just like 2 hours with us. He was so generous with his time. But where he started is he had us go around the room and not introduce ourselves. He said, tell me about your grandparents. Mm-hmm. And it was such an interesting way to get to know people, because it was about, okay, well, I can know about you, but where are you rooted? Mm-hmm. And so, that you sort of immediately went to that sense of rootedness. And then, you go off to Claremont, and I love the story with, the dad with a tear in his eyes. And what you needed to find is, okay, what am I going to be rooted in here? Yeah. Where's the broken body of the sacred? Mm-hmm. So now, how long have you been at McCarty Memorial? I've been at McCarty, you won't believe it, for 9 years. Yeah. Yeah, 9 years. Mm-hmm. When I got to McCarty, so I drove around the neighborhood, and I didn't know much about the church. Yeah. Right? I was pastoring in Burbank for a period of time, and they told me McCarty is this historic church. Yeah. And I was like, historic how? Tell me more. And so I did research around how McCarty was one of the first churches to do integration, how they had a pastor in the 50s by the name of Dr. Kring Allen, who was a white man from the mid-America, who said he wouldn't come unless the church did integration. And how the denomination sent a black minister down with him, and they went door by door, and they started doing housing covenant busting in the West Adams, because if you are familiar to LA, you know that Wilshire Boulevard is kind of like the railroad tracks for the city of Los Angeles. And so you couldn't live, beyond there. And so because of their integration, they would have white members go and try to apply for houses and move black families in. And then they would do freedom summers, and they were doing all of this work. And so when I got to McCarty, I read all this history. Then I looked and saw, like, the building wasn't really taken care of. We had a good remnant of folks, not that many, like 12, 15 people inside the church. Some of the doors had locks on them. And I literally the first sermon I preached was Prophesied Deliverance, borrowing from Cornell West and also the Valley of Dry Bones. And I just asked, can it live again? And people always say at McCarty, oh, you're like revitalizing the church, you're doing the mission. And I remind people, it's not my mission. The building had a mission. The community had a mission. God had called this place to do integration. God had called a place to do justice. When you do that work, you die. And so if you want the church to continue to live, you got to go back to what God had called this place to be in the first place. And so everything that's happening at McCarty is not my doing. It's just me going back and doing what God intended for it to do in the first place. Yeah, well, and then some people look at integration and they say, oh yeah, well, we did that. Except that what is being shown now is we're actually resegregating as a society. How does that mission of integration, what does it look like today at McCarty Memorial and for other communities of faith? Yeah, I mean, one of the benefits, I guess it's not the benefit, of me growing up in the South is that segregation was very much in your face. Mm-hmm. When I got here, I had to realize the biggest shift I had to realize is de facto segregation in LA is that all of our neighborhoods are segregated, right? So LA is integrated in where we work, where we play,
where we listen to music together, even where we get drunk together. I don't know if you get drunk. We're in church. We don't do that. But
We're an Episcopal church. Don't worry.
right. But it's not where we live. And so when we ask the question, how do I love my neighbor as I love myself? Well, your neighbor really doesn't look many places like people you want to, in a community that you say we live in. So at McCarty, one of the first things that people got to know who I was because we did Black Lives Matter. And people were calling and saying, why would you let Black Lives Matter in your church? And my response to them, I said, the church has always been the place where justice comes to grow. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The church has always been the place, especially in Black culture, where we figured out how to get free. Mm-hmm. It's been the place that helped spawn prophets that have helped America realize it needs to democratize itself. And so if the church isn't willing to open up its doors, then we've already put a death sentence on society. And so we have to be able to open up our churches, because if it is a house of prayer for all nations, it does not have a qualifier to that statement. Mm-hmm. It just says a house of prayer for all nations. And if prayer is sometimes on your knees, but also walking with your feet, then how are we going to learn to pray if we can't come to the house of God? And so for us right now, it looked like, all right, well, who wasn't included? And I did it, and I tell people all the time, if you come to my church on a Sunday, there's not a lot of people up in there. And that's good for me. It's okay. Because I told our church when I first got there, I said, it's going to take us a long time to get all the members back in the pews on a Sunday morning. But it will not take us a long time to make sure that we're there doing the gospel, because Monday through Saturday is when church happens. Mm-hmm. And so what we did with our finances was we went strategically through the building and figured out, how do we make sure that the space is prepared, that the theology of space is a welcoming theology, so that Monday through Saturday people are in there. And now, Mike, we got a youth bill. So kids who were kicked out of school, don't know where they want to go, they come there Monday through Saturday. And when they have funerals in their families, they call the church and we do it for them. When our fellowship hall, we redid it, and we open it up for community meetings and unions and all that kind of stuff. But 3 times out of the week, we feed the community, and we have a closet, and we make sure people come in and get the education that they need. Our preschool now does a sliding scale to make sure that everyone in the neighborhood can actually go to preschool, because we know childcare is a burden for folks. In the evening times, we open up the gym again, redid the gym, and made sure that the neighborhood kids can come in and play basketball and learn and get trained in the gymnasium during the week. We saw during the pandemic that the Black and brown communities were going to get left behind. And so I called my Jewish friend, which I told you about, and I told him, we need to start a CDC. He said, sure. And his joke is always, I didn't know what that was. I thought you meant a health administration because it's the pandemic. And I said, no, a community development corporation. And what we did was we created a workforce development program for youth in the community, because we know we took things out of the community. So we teach them construction and therapy and life skills, and they have a 90% retention rate. We created for our young kids during the summer freedom schools to make sure that they could come and get the education they needed, because we saw during the pandemic that internet apartheid is a different thing. You may not know about it, but internet broadband does not go to some neighborhoods, especially Black neighborhoods in South LA, right? And so we wanted to make sure they had somewhere to get school. That's what integration looks like to us. Mm-hmm. It looks like, how do we actually feed your body, your soul, and your mind Monday through Saturday? And if you come in on Sunday morning, then we always tell people, I'm Black, so you're going to get a Black sermon. All right, I'm not going to leave my culture, but it will not isolate anyone. Mm-hmm. You will be included, because if you serve a God of the oppressed, all of us are oppressed in some way.
Just let that sink in. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I want to talk about hope, because everything that you just said, hope just beams from it. It makes me feel hopeful. And so it's interesting, because as I listen around, I hear a lot of despair. especially when we sort of look at where we're going as a nation. And I found this, Pew, and I shared this with you earlier, this poll. The Brookings Institution did a survey at the end of last year where 77% of Americans say they believe the country is going in the wrong direction. And CBS News did a poll at the end of the year asking Americans if they felt hopeful. And what was interesting about the results is how they broke down by age. Under 30, 60% felt hopeful. 30 to 44, 51% felt hopeful. Slight tick, 45 to 64, 37% felt hopeful. And then over 65 actually ticked up a little bit to 38%. But what really struck me was those first two, particularly the under 30 of 60%, feel hopeful. And I'm just wondering, how does this resonate with your experience? Does it surprise you? And also, what makes you hopeful?
Yeah, hope for me is the twin of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And hope for me is not optimism.
Okay, talk about that.
So optimism is, you can look at the data, you can look at the statistics, and you can say, this can get better.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at history and say, oh, maybe, this can get better. It will speak to us. Mm-hmm. It's more of a quantitative measurement, I think optimism is. Mm-hmm. Hope for me is a qualitative measurement. And that hope looks at despair when there's nothing left and says, there's something on the inside of me that tells me this is not the end. And I think when you look at that number of 60%, I think there are a lot of young people who are just beginning to discover what life means. And that's not a bad thing, because those who are trying to discover what life means have not been tarnished by the disappointments or been tarnished by the amount of no's. And so instead of putting periods in their lives, they put commas. And so I think of March for Our Lives. When we have so much gun violence, and we're not going to get into that, why we do all that. But the young people wanted to plan March for Our Lives, and they were planning it with Indivisible. They did it at my church. And I would go to the room and I would look at the young people and figure out how are they organizing. And they had so much energy in them because they believed, well, it's up to us to figure it out. It's our world. And so they worked hard because they believed that they could write their new story, that the life working paper of their lives. And I'm going to say that again in the sermon because it's Howard Thurman, and I admire Howard Thurman as a Morehouse guy. But the life working paper of their lives is not over, right? That a no is not a no forever. It's just a delay, just a setback. And in our country, I think reason why we lose hope is because we believe, history is just repeating itself. And I just have to ask, which history is repeating itself? Right? For me, I'm hopeful because I understand that as a Black person in this country, my job has always been to remind America that it's not yet a democracy. And because I'm still living in that legacy, I'm hopeful that one day we can get to a democracy. Right? So all of us have to ask ourselves, what is my purpose? Your ancestors believed something, that's why they had you. Right? And so hope for me means really leaning back into my faith. It means going to the wall or my prayer closet. It means having interactions, being willing. I don't know if you didn't want to go here, but being willing to be broken open. we lose hope when we close ourselves in. If we're not willing to have a new experience or even just a different one, even with those who harm us, then we will lose hope. Hope will be a fleeting dream. But if we are willing to be broken open, if you're willing to let Rumi words be true, that there is no perfect offering, that the cracks is where the light gets into our lives, then we can find hope again. Because there's always something to be hopeful about.
Yeah, just sort of push that piece. I'm so glad you talked about getting broken open. I had something and I lost it, which is just happening more and more to me. And it is, I know what it was. Because one of my favorite things that Brene Brown says is she says, vulnerability is something that we attribute as weakness in ourselves and strength in others. And what I've experienced is we can have such a fear of vulnerability, of being broken open. And yet when we watch someone be vulnerable, we don't think of them as weak. We are in awe of the strength that it takes. That's the model of Christ, is this ultimate vulnerability. And yet, I think about the idea is, if someone is going to make themselves vulnerable, what we hope, and I'm sure what that person is hoping, if I make myself vulnerable, is that we come up around that person and maybe meet in that place of vulnerability. It's like your vulnerability makes me think, well, maybe I can be safe being vulnerable. And yet in our political environment, we've reached the stage in the election where my mail is full of these flyers, these mailers, and they're almost all negative. They're almost all attacking, which to me is like, boy, that doesn't encourage anyone to be vulnerable. That's like anything you say can and will be used against you on this battlefield. And I wonder about this as pastors. How do we create that community? How do we, ultimately when we allow ourselves to be broken open, part of that is risk. Jesus ended up on the cross. So how do we with our communities? Is this I guess what I'm trying to say is this an opportunity for faith communities to lead the way in a different way of being?
Yeah, I think the faith community, this is the place where progressives and people who radically believe in the unselfishness of God can can hoard the blessings of God.
Say that one more time.
What did I say?
You said the people who believe in
the radical unselfishness of God can no longer hoard the blessings of God. Because the blessing of God for all of us, whether you believe in a collective salvation or individual salvation, I'm not going to get into your soteriology this morning, but either way, it was you were vulnerable, that God found you when you were open to hearing another voice, that you had to surrender at some point, whether it was collectively or individually, and say, I need help. I have to believe in something bigger than myself. Mm-hmm. That's what the nation needs. Yeah. It needs a moment where we can actually surrender, either collectively or individually, and say, we can't do this by ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that the great lie, the distorted moral narrative has been that America is the land of individualism. That we have exceptionalism, and the only thing that we're exceptional at is hiding our pain, right? We're not exceptional at actually loving one another or figuring out how are you harmed today and how can I make you well. We don't ask those questions because those questions make us reflect upon our own harm, our own guilt, our own pain. But the good theologian Ambrose back in the day will remind us that our faith is as good as our doubt. Right? And our democracy is as good as our doubt. our love for one another will be as good as our doubt. That I don't know if it's true or not that black people are going to come rob me. I don't know if it's true or not that they put these people on a bus, send them out here, and they think that immigrants are going to take all of our jobs. I don't know if it's true or not that we should be doing war because war is a way to peace when war has only been a way to subjugation and oppression. Like, I don't know if it's true or not. So let me explore, let me open up and see, is there something on the other side of this? That's how we begin to heal. When you go to a doctor, I don't know if they do this anymore because, we have personal space, and that's good because people went too far, right? But when you go to the doctor when I was a child, I used to hate go to the doctor, but the doctor would usually put his hand, or she would put her hand. I had a woman doctor, so I don't know about you, but I had a woman doctor, and she would put her hand on my shoulder and be like, "It's all right, like we're gonna do whatever." It made me comfortable. There's no more. We don't soothe one another anymore, right? And so that's where I think the church can lean in, because the church is supposed to be the place that is, where we serve a God that was willing to bear it all, to be fully exposed, that sits before what may say the greatest moment in his life, in Jesus' life, for me, is that he sits and says, "Father, I wish this cup would pass." It's the vulnerable moment that life is hard, and sometimes our greatest moments come from our deepest vulnerability. I'm not preaching right now. I'm preaching at 11. But I will say this.
Preach on.
If you have not seen the movie Origins,
Oh, no, I want to see it. Yeah.
I would suggest you go and see it and take your tissue with you and be willing to be broken open, because you should read the book. I read Cass. You should read the book. But just know that all that she wrote came from her vulnerability. Mm. And what does it mean that when we are in our most vulnerable states, that is when God speaks? Mm. There's something there, and the nation can learn from it, and the church should lead the way, because we do it every Sunday.
What you're reminding me of as I look at our nation is, I look at history, and I think there's sort of these hinge moments sometimes. And for me, one of them is one that just isn't sort of one we usually think about, but it's really, for my money, the last time an American president actually tried to speak a vulnerable truth to the American people, and it was Jimmy Carter. Mm. It was when he gave what was then called the crisis of confidence speech. It then got called the malaise speech, even though he never used that word. And it was President Carter, out of his heart, and really he has a pastor's heart, of saying, I need to connect with the American people and say this tough truth lovingly of what we're facing. And as Americans, we went way in the other direction, and then the Reagan Revolution and all that happened. But then Jimmy Carter went on with that pastor's heart to demonstrate leadership on both a local and a global scale like we have never seen. And I wonder if and when we will be receptive to that kind of vulnerability, that kind of loving truth-telling, from our leaders. Do you see that happening in our lifetime?
I'm hopeful.
You're hopeful. There you go.
Yeah, because I'm hopeful that one day we will be able to trust our leaders and not just fear them. What I see happening so often in government, when we're doing protests, we're writing these laws, is that we operate from a space of fear and not trust. If I trust you, then I believe that you genuinely have my best interest at heart. Mm-hmm. If I fear you, I will try to convince you what my best interest is. and try to create guardrails because I know that you will, if given the chance, hurt me. I pray earnestly that we get to a place where we can trust our leaders. That is the power of a good pastor. That is the power of good parents. That is the power of a good teacher or a mentor, is that they taught you the greatest lesson, which is how to trust. That's what's wrong with America. We don't trust. That's why we're not vulnerable. We don't want to trust, right? And those that we trust, I always remind people that Dr. King got killed not because he had a dream. Dr. King got killed because he actually challenged America to deal with poverty, to deal with war, to deal with militarism. And America killed him because for many people, a lot of people begin to trust Dr. King. And when we are vulnerable and you trust someone and they tell you the truth, you can either listen to it or you run away. We do it all the time with our parents. I mean, just think about your parents, right? Your parents love you, you trust them, and then they tell you a hard truth, and you're like, I'm leaving tomorrow.
That's right.
And I'm never coming back, right? It's what we do. We run. But I wonder what it'll look like if we just sat there for a little bit.
Amen.
And came in.
Amen. I want to expand this conversation out here. Others might have something. Let's go to Patrick here first.
Thank you for your words. What comes to mind for me is I've been reading a book called Living on the Borders of the Holy by William Countryman, and he references Verna Dozier. And she talks about, in a book that she wrote, or an essay, the authority of the laity. And so my question to you is, how do we deal with the dynamic that the congregations tend to put too much of their power and their responsibility onto the clergy to do the work of the church? Can you speak to that?
How much time we got?
I didn't pay him.
Yeah, so a couple of things. The ministry is not meant to be done alone. 2, Jesus already died, so we don't need, he needs a high priest, so pastors are not royalty. If you think your pastor is royalty or a reincarnation of God in some sort, and is better than you, then you are setting yourself up to be heartbroken and for your pastor to be burnt out and to probably live a shorter life. And so laity is important because the only way a pastor is held accountable, the only way a church grows, is that everyone in the congregation has to take on the DNA of what the church says it is. And then you have to disciple one another, right? Jesus gets disciples not by inviting each and every one, right? Jesus gets disciples by, hey, Peter, you want to be, or Simon, you want to be my disciple? Oh yeah, I have a brother. Let me bring him along with me. Hey, Mary, do you want to be a disciple of Jesus? Yeah, let me bring the other women. And Luke just says certain women came along with them. When all of us realize that we have a stake and that it is a shared vision, it is a shared ministry, that the priesthood of all believers is a thing that the Bible tells us about, then that is what we're doing. And that what your pastor then becomes is what a shepherd is supposed to be, a guide. A pastor is not the be-all, end-all, and hopefully I don't get you in trouble, Mike.
No, you're preaching it. Keep going.
But a pastor is a guide. And so if the pastor should not be the CEO, the trustee, the accountant, and the janitor, the pastor is the servant. So yes, they would do all those things because they care and because God has called them to take care of people. But we got too many pastors who are burning the midnight oil and the day oil and all oil they don't got as well. And so they find themselves in therapy. They find themselves stressed out. They find themselves in hospital. One sabbatical ain't going to be enough for your pastor because they find themselves boxed in the arena. And everyone comes and watches, but no one wants to help. And so they see your pastor is working day in and day out, gets stabbed on the battlefield for the congregation, and we let him bleed out and go, he'll figure it out. He's a superhero, right? Or she'll figure it out. She's a superhero, right? No, they will figure it out. No, they won't. They need congregation.
Well, and sometimes we struggle asking people for help.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's that vulnerability thing.
That's a vulnerability
right?
thing. Yeah.
Because if the pastor says they need help, then they must not be talking to God. Actually, I think if your pastor tells you that they need help, they'd be talking to God a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Who else? What else? Oh, I got you, Clara.
Thank you, Reverend Eddie. I know that you're here because I grew up in a black church. My dad was a pastor, so I'm a PK, so I understand what you're going through. That and church members throw rocks.
Oh, yeah.
And they talk about the pastor, and it's not all good. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, the good it comes, but the bad, weighs you down. But sometimes, and this is more of a statement. Thank you for being here because. To me, you come as a revival, someone from the outside. You haven't been at our vestry meetings. You don't know what's going on in the church, but because you can be objective. So I thank you for being here. And I guess my question is, McCarty, and I know about McCarty. My dad, one of his good friends, was one of those ministers in the history, pastors in the history of McCarty. You came with a purpose to integrate the community. All Saints started in a Jim Crow that we're trying to face right now. How do we come away from the Jim Crow setting? Pasadena was the Jim, the history of Pasadena. How do we move into full integration, full embodiment of the neighborhood, of our community that we live in?
Yeah. When it comes to integration, I always say it's not about assimilation. It's about multiculturalism. This may be a dirty word because everyone's doing DEI now and no one kind of really knows what it means. But it's about multiculturalism, right? Multiculturalism means that if I come to your service or to your meetings, that you see me, you Sal Bona, that you see me in all of who I am. And there is some part of me that is reflected in what is going on. And I won't take about church, I'll just take it out of church because church is maybe too close. But I'll say in nonprofit settings that I've served in, just having people of color on staff, or just having people of color in the music, or just having people of color working as organizers does not make your organization integrated. It makes your organization tolerant. But when organizations and organisms realize that multiculturalism means that your story is now reflected. Your story is our story, and that we have to do the hard work of realizing that your history is my history. And so then I give you not only a platform, but I also give you space to express. That's when you get a multicultural situation going on. And it's hard. We have not figured it all the way out at McCarty. Listen, the person who sits at the top usually prefaces their culture more than anyone else's. But there is a way in which we can create a gumbo of sorts for folks where you can be authentically yourself in a space and still move forward with the mission. And so I challenge congregations, I challenge churches, I challenge organizations, I challenge our government to see us, all of us, and all of our differences, and pay deference to the difference and embrace. We don't just need white spaces with black faces. We need multicultural spaces.
Thank you. Wow. We just got a couple minutes left, and then we got to get you vested and into church. If you could leave us with a word, I know you're going to preach a word in a little bit, but if you could leave this gathering with a word for such a time as this, what would it be?
I will leave you with the word hold on to hope. As an old black preacher once said, because you can still limp and leap on scattered portions of broken dreams.
Say that one more time.
You can still limp and leap on scattered portions of broken dreams. So hold on to hope. It's not over yet.
Amen. Thank you. Eddie Anderson, everybody. So we're going to get him out of here, and I hope you all join us in church at 10 o'clock. We're having a wonderful Lunar New Year celebration. Pastor Eddie is preaching. It's going to be a great day. God bless you all. Gary Hall next week. We've got Gary, who is a former dean of National Cathedral, former staff member here, and we're going to talk about the intersection of faith and politics from his perspective.